In this lesson, we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting fractions that have algebra in them. The main thing we need to remember for this is how to add and subtract normal fractions. So if I had 1/6 plus 2/9, remember the key is to get the lowest common denominator, get these bottom numbers to be the same. And I do it by multiplying. So what does 6 and 9 both go into? The lowest number that they'll both go into, and that is 18. 3 6's go into 18, 2 9's go into 18. So to turn this 6 into 18, I have to times it by 3, which means I times the numerator by 3 as well. And to turn the 9 into 18, I'm going to have to times by 2, which means multiplying the numerator by 2 as well. So then I write my new fractions down, and so I've got 3 over 18 plus 4 over 18, and now when I add them, the denominator does not change, because remember the denominator tells us how big the pieces are, and the pieces aren't changing any size here, but the numerator will change because I've got 3 pieces here plus another 4 pieces there, so we end up with 7 over 18. We also need to remember what like terms are, and so if I've got this expression here, the 3x is like terms with the negative 2x because they have exactly the same letter there. And so that means I could write that as just x, 3x take away 2x. Notice the 5y hasn't changed, nor has the 4p, and I can't do anything else to that. The y and the x and the p, they're not like terms. I don't put them together and make 9xpy or anything like that. They must stay separate, just as we've got them there. So getting into it, here's some algebraic fractions because they've got the letter a in them, and we're going to add them. Now the first thing to note is that getting the common denominator works exactly the same as normal. So I think, what does 8 and 6 both go into? And that is 24. So how do I turn 8 into 24? I times it by 3, so I times the top and the bottom over here by 3. And how do I turn 6 into 24? Times it by 4, so do that with the top and the bottom. So I'm going to have 24s on the bottom, and the top here will be 3 times 3a, which is 9a, and 4 times a, which is 4a. So I end up with 9a over 24 plus 4a over 24. And the next thing to note is that when we're putting the numerators together, we just need to be careful with like terms. So this is 9a's plus 4a's, and so that's like terms, which means that I can just put 13a's there. So it ends up being 13a over 24. Remember, not 13a squared or anything. There's just 9a's there and 4a's there, so it's just 13a over 24. Now I'm just going to change the question a little bit. This time we're going to use an x and a y there, just so we can see how this is a bit different. So finding the common denominator is exactly the same as over here, and so it's still 24. So I times this side by 3 and the other side by 4. But note that on my next line here, now I've got 9x over 24 plus 4y over 24. Now I can't add 9x and 4y. They're not like terms. And so here's the way we show it. We just put the 24s together as one number on the bottom, and then we leave 9x plus 4y on top, and we don't do anything else to it. It's certainly not 13xy, and so that's how we're going to leave it when we can't collect the like terms. You do put the 24s together as one single number on the bottom, but you just leave those separate on top. We should also note that if you had a non-fraction in your question, you can actually make that into a fraction just by putting a 1 underneath. So 1 is the denominator. And now I've got 2 fractions. I could find my lowest common denominator like usual, which is pretty easy because it's just going to be 5. If one of the numbers is 1, then the common denominator is just whatever the other number is. We should also note that we actually do not convert improper fractions to mixed numbers when we've got the algebra. So if we had 9x over 5, yes, the 9 is bigger than the 5, but we don't convert it. We don't try and make it 1 4/5 x or something like that. We just leave it as 9x over 5. So you won't need to worry about mixed numbers at all in this lesson. All right, we'll take a look at some examples now. So on the first one, we've got 3a over 5 plus a over 10. So let's start by writing it down. And now let's get our common denominator. Since 5 goes directly into 10, we'll just be able to times this side by 2, we won't need to touch the 10 there. We can just leave that side the way it is. And so we end up with 6a over 10. Now you don't really need to write these down when you're doing these sorts of questions. If you just write down that line and then go straight to that line underneath, that's fine. That's showing enough working. And now since they've got the common denominator there, they're both 10, I'll be able to add these two together. So 6a's plus 1a is 7a's altogether, and we just put the 10's together. And remember, we don't make it 20. Don't add them together. The denominator does not change. Now in this second one, we've got a non-fraction added to a fraction. So when I write this down, I'm going to change that into a fraction as I do it. And so I'm just going to make it 2x over 1. And now the whole rest of the question will work the same as normal. The lowest common denominator is very easy to find. It's just going to be 7 because I can turn 1 straight into 7 just by multiplying by 7. So I do that on the bottom and the top, and then I get 14x over 7 plus 4x over 7. Once again, collect our like terms together. So 14x plus 4x is 18x, and put the 7's together, but don't change it because it's the denominator, and do not change it into a mixed number. That's fine the way it is. Now in example 3, we're going to look at a minus, which of course works exactly the same way except you're minusing. And so I'll start by writing down the question and getting my lowest common denominator. The lowest thing that 5 and 6 both go into is 30. So I need to times this side by 6 and the other side by 5 to make them both 30. And so let's write down the results there. Of course, 6 times t is just 6t, and 5 times m is 5m. Now on this next one, of course, I can't go 6t minus 5m. It's definitely not 1tm or anything like that because they're not like terms. And so what I do is I put the 30s together just by themselves underneath, just put 30 once, and this just stays as 6t minus 5m on top. So I'm basically just taking that and I'm making it all one fraction by putting the denominators together, and so I'm only writing the denominator once. So let's try some practice questions with that. Remember to pause the video. And here's our solutions with the working that you should have. Now when I did this first one, I noted I needed the common denominator, so after writing the question down here, I thought, what does 3 and 4 both go into? And they both go in to 12. So in order to turn the 3 into 12, I had to times by 4. So I did it on the top and the bottom. I didn't write it down here, I just did it in my head. That's fine. So 4 times t is 4t. I wrote that down. 4 times 3 is 12, so I wrote that down. And then over here I had to times it by 3 because 4 times 3 is 12, write that down, and 3 times m is 3m, and I wrote that down. Now then I noted that these are not like terms, 4t and 3m, so I cannot put them together, and so I've just left them separate on the top there, but I did put the denominators together, and of course I just leave it as 12. Now in the second one, as I wrote the question down, I changed this 5t into a fraction just by putting 1 underneath, and then I looked for the lowest common denominator, which was just 3 because I can easily turn 1 into 3, and so times it by 3, and I times it by 3 on the top as well, and that got 15. Then I just had to put the numerators together. They are like terms this time, so I got 17t on the top, and of course the denominator doesn't change, so I just left it as 3. I do put them together, but it doesn't change. Here's some more practice questions if you need another go. Remember to pause the video. And there's our solutions to those ones. Hopefully you got them right with the correct working. And that's the end of this lesson.